welcome. You're watching I-24 News, coming to you from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. The US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein has been meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem amid US efforts to avoid an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. Make a deal to bring back the hostages and hold elections now. Protesters kick off a week of disruption. And 14 Jordanian pilgrims die of heat stroke as they make the Hajj pilgrimage to the Muslim holy city of Mecca. Let's begin, though, in the north of Israel as US Envoy Amos Hochstein arrives in the region to try and prevent an all-out war breaking out between Israel and the Iranian-backed terrorist organization Hezbollah. The group has fired some 19,000 missiles at Israel since October 7th, while the IDF has targeted some 300 Hezbollah fighters. Well, our correspondent Robert Swift is up in the north of Israel. And, Rob, we're hearing that the IDF has managed to target another prominent member of Hezbollah. What do we know?
That's right. This is Mohammed Mustafa Ayoub, who is the commander of rockets and missile units in Hezbollah's southern units, those that buffer up against the border and have been responsible for launching many of the weapon systems across Israel's northern border. Now, aside from that incident, it's actually relatively quiet here in the north. The only other major incident taking place is an IDF Skylark drone which fell into Syrian territory to the east of the Golan Heights. Now, the IDF have said that there has been no data leak related to this, and they haven't yet explained why the drone fell out of the sky. But aside from that, and a few bursts of artillery fire that we've been hearing, this is the quietest I've seen it up on the northern border in some time. Now, a little while ago, I was talking to the mayor of the city behind me, Kiryat Shmoni, and he was saying that unfortunately, the quiet that is being felt in his city and along the northern border, it's not quiet due to any Israeli actions, not due to the actions of the Israeli military, but rather due to the Muslim holiday Eid, which is taking place. Now, it's been reported in Lebanese media that residents of many of the Lebanese communities along the southern border, the border with Israel, they have been returning to visit their communities and to visit cemeteries there since Saturday evening. Now, this may explain why Hezbollah has been relatively quiet. The only activity that took place so far today appears to have been a drone that the IDF intercepted near the western city of Akko. But aside from that, things are relatively quiet here at the minute. The question is, how much longer will that remain?
Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Danny Ayalon is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and the former deputy foreign minister. Thank you for being with us, Danny. So Amos Hochstein, the US Special Envoy, is here once again. Any chance he might be able to bring down the temperature?
Well, Laura, first of all, it's good to see you and be with you again here in the studio. And, well, Amos Hochstein, I think, has made some numerous trips already here without much success because Hezbollah is an Iranian organ, basically, and they get their marching orders from Tehran. However, I don't think that Tehran wants to lose their big card, after losing Hamas as a fighting machine that threatening Israel, taking out Hezbollah, and Israel is capable of taking out Hezbollah, although with a heavy cost, but we can certainly do that. Iran, I think, still would like to keep Hezbollah as a kind of a threat to Israel in case there is a direct war between Israel and Iran. For instance, if Israel decides to take out their nuclear facilities, they keep Hezbollah here as deterrence. It has been, as Rob Swift mentioned, it has been a little, downscaling of the activities, certainly from Hezbollah. I think it has more than with the Hochstein visit. I think it has to do with the Eid, with the Muslim...
It's the Muslim holiday, yeah. That's
yes, the Eid al-Adha, right.
A bit of a calmer situation.
So I think this is the case. Maybe this will, together with the Hochstein here, maybe it will start having some traction cooling down, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, Danny Ayalon for now. Thank you. Well, joining us on the line, Michael Mulroy is the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, Amos Hochstein, he has no means of speaking to Hezbollah. The United States doesn't have any direct channels with Hezbollah, as I understand it. He can only speak to the Lebanese government, and we know that the government in Beirut has no control over the situation whatsoever. Is this a wasted trip?
So good to be with you and your audience. I certainly hope not, because this is a big concern of the United States and I think the region, that this second front could open up and be even more substantial than conflict right now in Gaza. So I do agree with the premise of your question. They have no control over Hezbollah, but they very well could pass and exchange messages, much as the United States does with other groups, like even countries like Iran. There is an intermediary that can help exchange messages. That's probably what Amos's intention is here.
What if the international community still doesn't manage to enforce UN Resolution 1701 and push Hezbollah back, and Israel decides it can't live like this anymore, it will have to act alone? Will it face sanction from the Biden administration if it does that?
Of course, I don't speak for the Biden administration, but my analysis is that they would not. I don't see that being the way the United States goes. I don't think the concern of the U.S. government right now is about the unlawfulness, if you will. To your point, it's the Security Council resolution that requires them to go back to the Litani River. I think what the U.S. concern is that it's likely to pull in the U.S. military into a conflict between the IDF and Hezbollah, at least from the air, and that is something they don't want to see. So I think it's more of a concern of this war broadening and the U.S. potentially becoming directly involved.
Now, aside from the deal very early on with Hamas, they released hostages as part of a deal brokered by Qatar back in November. There has been no progress whatsoever in the negotiations with Hamas. Hamas has rejected numerous offers from Israel. Why does America think it would be any different to talk to Hezbollah, which is just another Iranian proxy? It's just another terrorist group.
So I think the U.S. government, particularly Secretary Blinken, would agree with your categorization of Hamas and how they've gone about this negotiations, pretty much saying that he doesn't believe that they've been upfront and earnest at this at all, taking 2 weeks to respond to the latest offer and then essentially going back on things that they already had agreed to. But from a diplomatic perspective, cutting off diplomacy and not talking about it is generally a bad idea. The only thing left after that is some kind of action, military or other. So I think the U.S. is going to continue pushing dialogue over conflict, but I do think there's a realization that there's not a whole lot of partnership when it comes to this dialogue from Hamas, and potentially not from Hezbollah either.
Tens of thousands of Israelis can't return to their homes. The whole of the large parts, anyway, of the north of Israel are essentially a war zone now. They're uninhabitable. Is the U.S. trying to, or is the Biden administration, I should say, trying to buy quiet ahead of the elections?
So I think it's impossible not to look at how this could impact the election, not just this particular concern about a war between Hezbollah and Israel, but also the current ongoing war in Gaza, how it's been executed. And of course, I'm not a political person, but there's a large portion of the Democratic base that has significant issues with how President Biden has essentially supported Israel in this. So I think all of that is going to have a play in this, but ultimately, none of this is the decision of the United States. I think the country's enduring partnership will endure beyond any particular individual, either in the U.S. or Israel. But it does have an impact on the current policy toward how we view things, we being the world, we, the United States government, view things both in Gaza and the potential for a conflict with Hezbollah.
Former Deputy Assistant Secretary, thank you very much indeed, Michael Mulroy.
Thank you.
Well, for another perspective, we're joined now by Dr. Walid Faris, foreign policy expert and the author of several books, including Iran, Imperialist Republic. He joins us now. Dr. Faris, good to see you. Now, the received wisdom seems to be that neither Israel nor Hezbollah wants a war. What will it take, in your view, to prevent one?
Thank you, Laura, for having me. I would add one thing. Neither Israel nor the Islamic Republic of Iran, that defines basically very clearly that Hezbollah coordinates, or actually I would even push 1 inch and say receives instructions on the strategic levels from the Islamic Republic of Iran. So Hezbollah, basically, if it was a nationalist faction, they control Lebanon, they could cut all the deals they want, like many other dictatorships. But the problem is that even when they control Lebanon, and I mentioned the government of Lebanon, the institutions of Lebanon, they oversee the national security of Lebanon, they still receive those instructions. Will Tehran have an interest? Yes, in all your discussions, it was very clear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is looking at what's happening in Gaza, is looking at what the future of Hamas will be. And of course, as it was said in your show, they are looking at possibility that Israel and Iran, meaning the Islamic Republic of Iran, may clash over the nuclear or other. So they keep that card warm, front burner, back burner, until they decide eventually what's the next step with Israel.
Amos Hochstein is here. The Europeans, mainly the French, have also got proposals on how to prevent an all-out war. Do you think any of these proposals could bring peace?
Look, when we see on TV U.S. diplomats, French diplomats, UN diplomats acting, the actual action is not there. This is what shows. This is the tip of the iceberg. It's the actual negotiations with the with the third parties. If it's with Iran's regime, so on and so forth. It seems to be that both sides, obviously the Islamic regime side, is trying to see should it be an interest for them to continue the fight, the bombardment of Israel or not. They have to decide. Israel has one interest, which is her national security, its population. It's a pretty narrow place at the end of the day, but also very important, preempt a next wave. What the Israelis, of course, they know it more than anybody else, have learned is that out of nowhere, Tehran could wage a missile attack like they've done. So now they want to make sure that they are deterring Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's why we see movement from Gaza into the border. And on the other hand, asking international diplomacy, asking this administration, the French, to make sure that there are no misinterpretation between Israel and Iran.
Now, just like tens of thousands of Israelis, Lebanese citizens on the other side of the border have been forced to evacuate their homes. The southern Lebanon is also a war zone right now. Is there any sign inside Lebanon of some kind of resistance to Hezbollah and its apparent plans to take the country to war?
That's a great question. We need to have some microscope to look into Lebanon. Lebanon is not just one population. You have 16 communities, multiple political options. Hezbollah is leading the coalition in charge. There is an opposition in Beirut and other parts of Lebanon and Mount Lebanon in the north. They don't like Hezbollah. They don't want to see the war coming to their areas. So those who are leaving the southern border of Lebanon are actually from the base of Hezbollah. Those who are living in Mount Lebanon in the north, they don't want the war to come to their area. Will that mean that they will oppose Hezbollah? There are some signs. But without an international or a foreign real pressure on Hezbollah, I don't expect the Lebanese by themselves, as they've done in 2005 with the Cedars Revolution, to rise. They will defend and protect their areas. They want them to be neutral. They may have a silent message to Israel, don't hit us, we are not part of this war. That is possible.
Dr. Walid Faris, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Well, meanwhile, here in Israel, anti-government protesters are blocking roads for a second day to call for early elections and a deal with Hamas to free the hostages. This as a new poll from the Jewish People Policy Institute finds that some 60% of Israelis now want the hostage for ceasefire deal that was presented by the US President Joe Biden earlier this month. Let's go to Jerusalem. We're joined now by our correspondent, Zach Andrews. Zach, what's happening?
Well, if you joined us in the last hour, you saw a very empty street. Now we are surrounded in a sea of people. These are the protesters, some 100,000 that are expected to arrive in Jerusalem tonight to protest and call for new elections and an end to this current government, for an acceptance of the presented hostage deal that's been offered by President Biden. We just spoke to one of the hostage family members, Yotam Cohen. He's 23 years old. His brother is 19 years old, one of the soldiers on October 7th that was taken hostage from his tank. He had some fiery words about what he believes needs to happen next. He says that many of the hostage families, although most of them have not said as much, but feel as though there needs to be elections. There needs to be a new government to be able to get a deal done. He says that now more and more family members are coming forward with these opinions, with these feelings, and that they're sharing them. He said that he hopes, too, that his brother, who's in captivity, sees this protest tonight, sees the protests that are taking place around Israel, and knows that his brother, that he is with him, and that he hopes he sees those images. We just spoke to him. Here's a quick soundbite of what he had to say.
This is the start of a week-long protest against the government, with a calling for reach hostage deal and for the resignation of the government and the re-election, because the Israeli people are sick and tired of this government who is unable to win this war, who is unable to achieve a deal. And this is why we're calling for the government to resign and to get away with our lives.
Yotam said that also we are tired of the promises, tired of the lies of this government. And that's the sentiment, that's the feeling that you get of this crowd tonight as you read some of the signs. There's also something I thought was very striking. There are balloons that have been brought in the shape of a sheep, a parade of about 20 balloons tied together on strings. We'd show you, but they're blocked by the flags in the crowd. And on the side of each sheep is a picture of a minister, of Ben-Gvir, of Netanyahu. Underneath it, in English and Hebrew, it says guilty. The ones that were holding those balloon sheeps as they paraded them through the crowd said it's sheep to a slaughter, that this is what this issue is doing to Israel. And that's what we're seeing all around us, the signs, the sentiment. It is going to be a very fiery night here in Jerusalem.
All right, Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there in Jerusalem, where protests are underway. Well, joining us this hour, Shiri Fein-Grossman is a member of Forum Dvorah, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security. She's also formerly of the Israel National Security Council. Welcome, Shiri. Danny Ayalon, former ambassador to the US, is with us as well. So, Shiri, you've seen the division on the streets there, the protests on the streets, people getting very angry at this government, saying that it's not articulating a plan, people don't know what's happening. And today, Prime Minister Netanyahu dissolved the war cabinet, which was a kind of a moot move because Benny Gantz had already left and it was just him and his defense minister. Just your thoughts on the ongoing situation.
I would say to the latter, it's something that is very, it's not at all irregular. Ever since Golda, there's been a small forum to have consultations on war, and then the bigger forum, the cabinet, that actually takes the formal decision, has all the authority. And ever since then, there was kind of this way to make decisions that way. I believe it's not going to change so much. What will happen is probably there will be smaller debates headed by the Prime Minister, and he will go to the cabinet and actually ask them to give him the authority to decide on the material decisions, so he won't have to go back each time to the cabinet. But it's a question of this time if he will get it from this very right-wing cabinet characters, as we would say. So that's a question. Yes, there is rage on the streets, and we've been saying ever since the start of this war that you can take what happened on October 7 and you can see the heroism and the help that we reach out to each other, or it can turn into rage. And I hope this stops with soon and not turn into a very large-scale
real divisions in society. Danny Ayalon, I mentioned that survey. 60% of Israelis now want the government to accept President Biden's proposal. The trouble is Hamas rejected that proposal. So what is the public saying with that, do you think?
Well, it is an impasse, basically, and I think more than 60%, I think 70% of Israelis would like to have elections. That means there is no trust or confidence in this government, which is a situation, certainly in a war, which is unsustainable. So I believe that also with the departure of Benny Gantz and Eisenkot from the government, we will see a pickup of demonstrations like we see today in Jerusalem. If before Gantz leaving, we had maybe few thousands, maximum tens of thousands. Today we are seeing that they are reaching the mark of 100,000, towards many more hundred thousands, and this could really bring about elections. The way, the mechanics is hard to see because the government enjoys a 64 majority in the Knesset. The only way to have elections.
But the polls show that has changed, of course.
Of course, yes. But I would say you would need 5 members of the coalition to actually call for elections with the opposition to bring about elections. If this is the case or not, I do not know. But there is the opposition is trying to gear up. There are all kinds of talks and maybe new alignments in order maybe even to tempt a few members of the coalition to run with them in the next elections. So I think that with all the war, still going on in Gaza and the skirmishes and the tit for tat in the north, I think the political arena will be the most important to watch in the next few weeks.
Shiri Fan-Grossman, would it be possible even to hold an election logistically, given that you've got so many reservists fighting in Gaza, you've got a war on 2 fronts, but more? Would that be something that Israel could afford to do?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's doable. We just had elections for the municipality a few months ago, and it was done in most of the places. This is obviously a logistical challenge that is much more difficult, since in the municipal elections we didn't hold elections in the places under conflict, but actually that is supposed to take place later this year as well, like in Otef Gaza in the north. So we're still keeping our democracy, and this is, I think, what's the important message is. And our enemies and even people in Israel who love Israel who said, going out to demonstrate is actually hurting us with Hamas. He sees that we're weak, and I'm trying to tell him, but no, this is exactly the point. They don't understand. This is how they misread us. We're a strong democracy, and we always will be, and that's what we're fighting for. And it's so unfortunate that the leaders of U.S. and especially Macron, France, has made some ill decisions lately, and maybe we'll talk about it later, not understanding what's going on here and what Hamas is trying to do.
And do you think that the political situation is hurting the war effort? People are exhausted here. This is Israel's longest war since the War of Independence. A war is looming with Hezbollah, a much better funded, better armed enemy. How sustainable is this given the current level of mistrust in the government?
Well, the most important thing is to see an objective, a clear objective. So long as there is no clear objectives, then the attrition can become very prevalent. And right now, to talk about a total victory, this is not a vision, and this is not a concrete target or a marker to move towards. This is why we see the call for elections as a result of this impasse.
In fact, the leader of the Labour Party is saying that this government will be dragged to elections if it doesn't hold them soon. We are hearing some quite violent language.
I think we should split it into 2 really time frames. In the short run, yes, election might hurt the war. It might make us less coherent. But after the elections, we'll be much more united, and we'll get the confidence of the public again. And I think it'd be much easier to win. It will send a very important message to our soldiers.
Okay, thank you, both of you. Stay with us. Well, the families of 120 people are still waiting for news of their loved ones more than 8 months after they were taken hostage by terrorists. Among them, Lishai Lavi, whose husband is a hostage. Jody Notilowitz has this report.
It's another day that you wake up in the morning and you still think it's just a nightmare, and you understand it's the reality.
Every morning when Lishai Lavi wakes up, it gets harder and harder for her to remember how many days have passed since her nightmare began following the Hamas cross-border attack on Israel. Lavi's husband, Omri Miran, was one of the 250 hostages taken into Gaza that day by the terrorist group, and he remains in captivity over 250 days later. The last time he was seen was in a hostage video released in April. Lavi welcomed this sign of life, but mentioned how different he seemed.
To see him like this, it was really, really difficult. Everybody that know Omri, they know him, and the first thing that they said about him, that he have the biggest smile in the world, and he have the spark in his eyes. And when you see him, you see that he don't have his smile anymore, and he don't have the spark in his eyes.
She hasn't heard any new details of Omri since then. At the moment, the only thing she can do is focus on the two daughters she shares with Omri, almost 3-year-old Ronnie and 1-year-old Alma, who, she says, gives her the power she needs to continue.
I can say that my 2 beautiful little daughters give me the strength I think I need. I have to get up in the morning and take them to the Eden Garden and fight the fight of my life to bring Omri here. And I don't have anything else. This is my job.
In the meantime, peace mediators Egypt and Qatar are still working to reach a deal based on the most recent US peace proposal. As for Lishai, she expressed her hope that the Israeli government will be able to bridge any gaps in the deal so that the hostages will be able to come home.
I always said that there is no other options. Omri have to come back, and Omri come back. I saw him go, so I'm going to show him. I'm going to see him, come back here, and I'm going to do everything that I can for this.
Time for a short break. When we come back, the UN says conditions in northern Gaza do not constitute a famine. More on that as the IDF brings in 11-hour daily pauses in the fighting to help bring in aid. More next. Stay with us.
story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel. with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël.
The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. Well, the IDF says it's dismantled half of Hamas's forces in Rafah and has killed over 550 gunmen. It has been a deadly week for the IDF in the Strip, with 11 soldiers killed in the fighting this week. Nonetheless, the military has decided to enforce 11-hour ceasefires daily in order to bring in humanitarian aid. Prime Minister Netanyahu and his hardline coalition partners condemned the move. Let's take a listen to COGAT. This is the organisation in charge of facilitating the flow of humanitarian aid to people in Gaza.
Some recent measures that have been taken in addition to declaring humanitarian corridors and establishing a coordination cell are fixing existing roads and establishing new ones to improve the movement of convoys, and the announcement of a local tactical pause that will take place from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. each day along the road that leads from the Kerem Shalom crossing from here to the Salah ad-Din road and then northwards. This new initiative, which began on Saturday, allows international organizations to move on the route without having to first coordinate. This gives them greater flexibility, and we hope to see it increase the amount of aid making its way to the humanitarian zone. So far, we haven't seen the UN take full advantage of this step. Israel remains committed to facilitating aid and working with the international community to see the aid make it to where it is needed.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Famine Review Committee has published a report on the situation in the north of the Gaza Strip. It says there's not enough reliable information to declare a famine. The FRC says human suffering in Gaza is certain, but the situation does not meet the criteria of a famine. Well, still with me, former Ambassador Danny Ayalon and Shiri Fine-Grossman of Forum Dvorah. So first of all, Shiri, on the 11-hour ceasefires, which will be observed daily in Gaza, at least by the IDF. Is that a good idea when we've had such a deadly week for...
No, let's frame it otherwise. It's in a very particular part on the Philadelphia and Kerem Shalom to allow aid to go in, and under heavy criticism that there is a lack of aid coming in because Rafah crossing was closed. So
and it's still closed.
And the fighting in Rafah, in the center of Rafah, is still very strong. Today we've heard reports of a massive amount of our armed vessels going in by the IDF into the heart of Gaza.
But when you've got soldiers who are static, is that not a dangerous situation for them?
It is, but you have to balance everything. We need the IDF needs to buy legitimacy. It needs to buy time to win the war.
From the Americans.
From everyone, and it's every war. It's like this. It's nothing new. There's always this clock of diplomatic time that is giving, and let's be honest. Nobody imagined in the Israeli government that we would get this amount of time. So, but on the other hand, we weren't able to do very intense fighting for a long period of time. And so you're seeing the operation in Rafah and other places very focused. It's not very large scale. It's not going in with all the
far fewer civilian casualties.
Exactly. And this makes the war stretch a longer period of time, but with less casualties. And this is the IDF, what it needs to do to balance, to achieve, to get more time.
And the source of a lot of that pressure, Danny Ayalon, on Israel to stop the fighting was accusations of starvation and famine in Gaza. Now, the UN says there is clearly suffering. People are suffering, but they don't declare a famine. They say they don't have enough data.
Yeah, there's no famine and no starvation. It's been quite ridiculous, and the PR machine of Hamas and the one that helps Hamas is working overtime from the start, and we've seen it in every turn of the road. We see how they were lying blatantly, like with the numbers of casualties. They're talking about 37,000 killed civilians supposedly. At least half of those are terrorists.
But the UN revised down that number, if I understand it.
Yeah, right. But whatever the number
about
is.
Half are men in the right age.
Right.
So.
Whatever the number is, the ratio between terrorists and uninvolved is the minimal in modern fighting, from Afghanistan and, in Iraq, for instance. The ratio of terrorists to uninvolved was 1 to 12. The Americans and the Allied forces killed 12 civilians for every terrorist in Afghanistan. Here it's almost 1 to 1. Now about starvation, we have seen starvation and famine in Sudan, in Africa, all the way into Biafra, Yemen. So you see the emaciated people with blown up bellies. This is not the case in Gaza whatsoever.
And the Americans, of course, were under such pressure that they built a temporary pier to try and alleviate some of the suffering. A lot of people said it wouldn't work, and they've had to pack it up now and take it away. Yeah,
it was very unfortunate for them because of the choppy, seas in the Mediterranean at that time, and it did not prove to be very effective, unfortunately. But they will keep trying.
Okay, all right, thank you both. Well, Israel's annual arms sales reached a new record for a third straight year. Air defense systems accounted for the largest share of the $13 billion sale, with the biggest buyers in the Asia-Pacific region. Our Emma Siegel has this report.
For the third year in a row, Israeli arms sales have broken their own record. The Defense Ministry's International Defense Cooperation Directorate reported that exports totaled $13 billion last year, up from $12.5 billion in 2022. The value of exports has nearly doubled in the past 5 years. Air defense systems made up the largest chunk of exports at 36%, a massive jump from 19% in 2022. This is largely because of Israel's $4.2 billion sale of the Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missile system to Germany. The rising figure is also attributed to the Ukraine effect, where countries are arming themselves with advanced defense systems following the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022. In second place behind air defense, radars and electronic warfare systems accounted for 11%. And while Israel is known for its cyber intelligence systems, this only amounted to 4% of total sales in 2023. Amid the backdrop of widespread attempts to delegitimize and boycott Israeli companies globally, the Ministry of Defense says defense exports has become a central priority as part of an effort to strengthen security strategic relations worldwide.
Even in a year which the State of Israel is fighting against 7 different arenas, the defense exports of the State of Israel succeed in continuing to break records. This fact is a certificate of honor, first and foremost, for our defense industries and the creative and talented minds that work in them and drive them to the heights of breakthrough innovation.
While the Israel-Gaza war rages on and international outrage continues to mount, it is unclear if Israel will break its record for a 4th consecutive time in 2024.
Shiri Fine-Grossman, this comes, of course, just a few hours after a court in France ruled that Israeli defense companies cannot show at the Eurosatory arms fair in Paris. Not just that, Israeli citizens cannot attend either.
Yeah, no, not just that you can't, and you have to commit that you're not representing an Israeli company and technology if you want to enter the exhibition and work at the exhibition. And it's just an outrageous decision by Macron.
Russia and Israel banned.
No, because it just doesn't like the way Israel is operating now. Macron supported Israel. He was here after October 7, but it's very convenient, to come where we're being slaughtered, but where we have to win the war, and it's not an easy war to win. Then we paid the price. It's a slippery slope. Let's say the U.S. next year goes into a war that Macron doesn't like. So what is he going to do? He's going to ban Americans? No, I don't think so.
To be fair, it was a French court. It wasn't.
No, it's a decision by Macron, and then the Palestinians went to the court and said, it's not enough that Israeli companies don't show. You have to ban the brokers as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's even worse than that.
But the French are bucking the trend, aren't they? Because as we've just heard, Israeli arms sales are going from strength to strength. I mean, that is some rare good news.
Well, Laura, the perfidy of France is quite well known, and it's not the first time. In the most delicate times and dangerous times for Israel, it was the French government that exerted an embargo, arms embargo on Israel, started from 1967 all the way for today. And the most hypocritical thing of the French is that they show French armor and French military equipment, which is being protected, and there are main elements, Israeli elements. For instance, the French tank has a Israeli protection for its armor, a very sophisticated technology, and they're using it and showing the tank with the Israeli technology, with Israeli components, and they bar Israel from.
Well, we know President Macron does have his own political issues right now, doesn't he?
This is true.
When we look at the figures, though, the biggest buyers were in Asia. Who are the customers? And sales to the Abraham Accords countries, the UAE, Bahrain, etc., they have gone right down. How do you read that?
So I can't tell you the particular buyers, but I can speak to a trend that we're seeing, and I saw it when I was in the private sector, that a lot of businesses conducting in Asia. There's a lot of similarities there. There are shared goals and values, and a little bit of a cultural, in a way, differences, but also like this is like in the Philippines and other places. Singapore has always been a place where there's been deals like that on the table. Taiwan could be one of them. Korea is a huge supporter of Israel, and they definitely with the friction with North Korea and the weakening of the West. That's what we're seeing. So places like Ukraine, like Europe, like Germany, but other places in Asia that are actually threatened by China are all places that potentially the Israeli technology, which is the best or one of the best in the world in what it's doing, and it really proved itself throughout this war. It's no wonder it's in a all-time peak.
And
India has become a
India, of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's.
And with the increase in drone warfare right now, air defense systems are really the place to be, aren't they?
Sure. Listen, the two areas which are, let's say, proliferating in more is cyber technology, and Israel is very good at that, at the cutting edge, and missile defense. So these are the two areas which Israel excels in, and this is, I think, what also explains the boost in our exports this year, and hopefully next year as well.
Now, UAVs and drones are definitely the next thing, and I think the war is just an experiment. And I know many companies in Israel are working on this technology right now. And if they will crack it, it will be a gift to the world, basically.
Yeah. Sadly, war is still big business and doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. All right, thank you both for now. Now, the army is complaining that there's no plan for a post-war Gaza. Citizens from the north are complaining there's no plan to deal with Hezbollah, and civil groups are complaining that there's no plan to help reintegrate traumatized survivors of October 7th and former hostages. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum has been speaking at the Knesset today, and our senior correspondent Bianca Zadini has the story.
Moments of joy, emotional reunions, tears of relief. 92 Israelis who were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza have returned home safely. But after weeks or months in captivity, facing terrible conditions and a constant fear of dying, how do you return to a normal life? On Monday, the government was heavily criticized by the head of the medical team for the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, Dr. Haggai Levine, for not having plans for rehabilitation or treatment of those returned from captivity.
Yesterday, I visited Noa Argamani. I regret to tell you, despite all the joy, that she, along with the other released hostages, has no rehabilitation program. None. There is no body which has begun rehabilitating. No one has responsibility for rehabilitation. Even after their return, they're abandoned.
At a state audit committee in the Israeli parliament, the issue was, once again, brought to the table. The lives of the former hostages and their families and friends will never be the same again. The stories they tell are of constant emotional and physical abuse.
He's broken, and he needs time to heal and to fix his mind. He doesn't know what to decide. It's hard for him to make a decisions. And at the first night, he also whispered. He talked to me like this. he whispered. And I always tell him, Andrei, talk like this. You can talk. Talk.
They say there's not enough support in place to help them move on. But according to the government, every single person returned has a plan.
The Health Ministry Director General told me, and I know it to be true, that every hostage who returns has a program. They sit with him on a personal program, which will be put together by the teams treating him. So it's not true. The state definitely cares.
Meanwhile, it's not only the hostages who are blaming the government for not doing enough to help them. In April, survivors of the October 7th Nova Festival massacre said the government failed them that day and every single day since then.
I was covered by bodies over every part of my body. I hid under one specific body every time the terrorists came. The body punctured and bled on me from everywhere. I lifted its head and put its cheek over mine, and this is how I protected my body. So if a bullet hit me, it wouldn't hit my head. The terrorists didn't stop coming. I called the police non-stop, and the answer I got was, a police car is on its way. I got this answer for the duration of 6 hours. I was hiding for a total of 8 hours. The last 2 hours, I gave up and didn't call anyone. And indeed, cars did come by. But unfortunately, they were terrorist cars who came to shoot at us again and again. Does anyone have any doubt that I'm going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life?
We need treatment now and not to go back to work a month after it happened. There is no me. I have anxiety, flashbacks. I'm waking up at night. I experience this event again and again.
The journey to begin healing from the traumatic attack almost 9 months ago is only just beginning for those directly affected as well as for the Israeli nation as a whole. And the road is long.
Shiri Fein-Grossman and Danny Ayalon still with me. And of course, Israel is still coping with the trauma of October 7th, trying to recover on both an individual level with all of the soldiers who have been wounded, families who still have hostages in Gaza. I mean, the country needs to pull together at this time, doesn't it?
So there's you can connect the dots with a lot of issues. And the main issue is that the only thing that is truly functioning and working is the military, I would say, angle. On the tactical level, on the strategic level, it's not, because it needs a government to give it, a political agenda, a strategy. So he's struggling there, and that's why the war is dragged on so much. But from the civil side, from everything, from building, rebuilding, rehabilitation, the houses, and the psychology and the treatment they need, nothing is working properly, and it's so sad. And look, we have Forum Dvorah, it's a women's forum, and part of who I am and what the forum is about is that we have to have more women at the table, to really, make us see that there are other issues that are as important as education. I mean, we have kids in school that are, we have thousands of kids that don't know where they're going to school next year. And we don't have a decision. And we hear the Prime Minister say, September 1st is just a date. No, it's not just a date. It's a life for a family. When you want to plan next year, you need to know where the kid is going to school. So we need more women at the table, and we need more people that can manage the situation, and when they look holistically on all of the aspects and not just a military one.
And Danny Ayalon, I've heard it described as Israelis, they trust each other, they don't trust their leaders right now at all. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I would say that what Israel stands on now, and has been actually all through the years, are pretty much 4 legs, like a table with 4 legs. One is the civil society. We have seen from 7th of October, the civil society, the volunteers, they are the one who rose up. Government was nowhere to be seen. They were the ones who helped the evacuees in the south, in the north, and many, many other things. Second leg is, as Shiri said, is our military and defense system, which is very judicious, very experienced, and very, very capable. The third one is our technology, you know, and the high tech. Now we see that how the military, which is also high tech, military exports take over from other high tech. And the last one is the judicial system, which keeps away ICJ, ICC. They will be the buffer against international investigations.
All right, Danny Ayalon, Shiri Fan Grossman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Well, to other news now, 14 Jordanians died today as they made the Muslim pilgrimage to the Saudi city of Mecca. That was because of exposure to extreme sun and heat as they were performing rituals at the Hajj. Another 17 pilgrims are still missing. Well, the Hajj is, of course, one of the world's largest mass gatherings. Let's go to Dubai for more on that. Our correspondent Bastien Bourri joins us now. And Bastien, every year this is a huge undertaking, isn't it, for the Saudi authorities? Were these deaths avoidable?
I mean, it's hard to say, Laura, but we are still actually, has to be said, a long way from the 240 people who died last year in pretty similar circumstances, which shows that, yes, at the end of the day, the prevention work from the authorities is more effective, but that still doesn't eradicate the problem, which isn't just a heat problem. We're talking about 2 million pilgrims, some of whom are very old. Others experience this event with a huge, as you can imagine, a huge emotional charge, as all this is an opportunity of a lifetime for Muslims. So the Saudis will definitely have to find a way to improve their organization still further, because the current situation is still unacceptable for such a large-scale gathering.
And people come from all across the Muslim world, of course, to the birthplace of Islam. Not just ordinary people, but their leaders as well. Which world leaders performed the Hajj this year?
Well, officials from Qatar, from Iran, Turkey, Russia, and for the first time in more than 10 years, Syrian officials and citizens will be able to travel to Mecca, because the Hajj is also an international meeting place for leaders seeking to exist on the diplomatic stage, as was the case last year. I don't know if you remember, with the Palestinian Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and so on. So to such an extent that this Hajj has become a financial godsend, first for Saudi Arabia, because hosting this event has an economic impact with more than $10 billion a year to the state. And this partly explains why the Saudis were so happy to sign a reconciliation agreement with Iran, for instance, last year, allowing Iranian pilgrims to come to Mecca in very large numbers. And second, it is also good for countries who send pilgrims. The Syrian government, for instance, requires payments in US dollars for all travel packages in order to replenish foreign currencies in Syria, with millions of dollars pretty much spilled into the pockets of Bashar al-Assad's circle of friends.
Bastien, thank you very much indeed. Well, meanwhile, the tourists are returning to Tunisia. Local media is reporting a rise in visitors compared with last year, with over 3.5 million people choosing to holiday in the North African state. Tourism accounts for nearly 10% of the economy, but it was hit hard by the Arab uprisings and then a string of terrorist attacks by the Islamic State group. Well, joining us now, Alyssa Pavia is the Associate Director of the North Africa Programme at the Atlantic Council. Great to see you as always, Alyssa. Thank you for joining us. And are we seeing the number of visitors to Tunisia going back to those pre-ISIS levels?
Hi, Laura. It's great to be back. So as you well said, we are seeing an increase of tourism level this year, specifically now that the summer has begun, and there's been a sharp increase of 5.3% since this time last year. We may be seeing the level rising to those of the pre-2016, 2015 era, when tourism was about 5 to 6 million people each year, whereas now we're at 3.37 million people that have reached Tunisia. But it is still early on in the summer stages.
And as we can see from the picture, beautiful country, beautiful cities, beautiful beaches. You can see why people would want to go there. However, it does have its political issues as well, doesn't it? Notably, a strongman president in the form of Kais Saied.
Yeah, so we've discussed this many times before in this program. President Kais Saied is quite a controversial figure right now in Tunisia. He's been in power since 2019, and he has been doubling down on opposition figures, also in light of the upcoming elections that he's going to face in 2024. So whether or not this increase in tourism is also thanks to him, it's very difficult to say, but it's probably unlikely that it's thanks to anything that he's enacted so far. In fact, critics have said that he hasn't been investing enough in the tourism sector in Tunisia. And as you said, Tunisia is a very popular destination because of its location, because of its beautiful beaches and affordable luxury resorts. And so it is more likely that it has to do with Tunisia just being a popular destination than anything that the president has himself enacted.
And of course, Tunisia has a small Jewish community. A synagogue came under attack, didn't it, shortly after October 7th. How is the Jewish community faring there, given all the tensions surrounding the war in Gaza?
The Jewish community is increasingly under pressure. There have been a number of incidents that are pointing in the direction of an increase in anti-Semitism in Tunisia. There have been actually 2 synagogues that have been torched in the past 6 months. The last one was in March, although it is still under, the motive is still under investigation. The one that you pointed out to was the one from October 2023, where the public saw about 100 mobsters just torch on fire a 16th century-old unused synagogue from the city of El-Hama. And before that, even before the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war, President Kais Saied came out with a very controversial statement with regards to Storm Daniel, which was the storm that hit Libya in September, causing thousands of deaths. He said at the time that there's a Zionist conspiracy sparking outrage and fear of an increase in anti-Semitism. We also know that each year there's a Jerba pilgrimage that happens with about 7,000 to 8,000 Jewish pilgrims, Jewish and non-Jewish, but mostly Jewish pilgrims that go to Jerba. But this year it was limited to only 50 to 60 people because of the heightened security risks. So the Jewish communities are definitely tense right now in Tunisia.
It's a shame to hear. All right, Alyssa, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Alyssa Pavia there from the Atlantic Council.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Many thanks for watching. Do stay with us on I24 News. Nicole Zedek is up next. Goodbye.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, i24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on i24 News.
Welcome to this special edition of I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. It's day 255 of Israel at war. But how Israel will move forward with this war is pretty unclear. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu officially dismantled the war cabinet. It's not a surprising move since National Unity Party chair Benny Gantz left the three-member cabinet just last week, along with one of the war cabinet observers, former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot. The Prime Minister's office claims the war cabinet is no longer relevant since there's no longer an emergency unity government. But Netanyahu's move could also be a way of avoiding National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's calls to join the cabinet. Nonetheless, no war cabinet does not mean no war. The IDF says they've now dismantled half of Hamas's fighting force in Gaza's southern city of Rafah. Israeli forces have killed at least 550 gunmen in the southern enclave, and likely many more terrorists and airstrikes as well. Our I-24 News French correspondent Shani Gedalia was near the Israel-Gaza border, reporting on what this latest political move means for the battlefield.
Yeah, this is the biggest news of today. Benjamin Netanyahu dissolved the war cabinet. This war cabinet included, since the beginning of the war, Yoav Gallant, Benny Gantz, Gadi Eisenkot, Ron Dermer, and Benjamin Netanyahu as well. He said that as soon as Benny Gantz left, there is no need for a cabinet anymore. According to him, there will not be a new cabinet formed of the leaders of the coalition parties. Let's say that most of the analysts, most of the observers, see this decision of Netanyahu as a strategy of deflecting the demands of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich to join the war cabinet. So now that the war cabinet is dissolved, the security cabinet will convene, will meet at a higher frequency. Now, regarding the evolution of the combat in the Gaza Strip, the IDF published a statement today and said that the combat in Rafah continues and that until now it has defeated half of Hamas battalions in Rafah, and that it will gain full control of Rafah in 2 or 3 weeks. The IDF also gave some numbers. Until now, there were more than 550 terrorists killed, around 200 tunnel shafts discovered, and the IDF also eliminated Hamas' last major rocket inventory. And the IDF also revealed that the houses and the tunnels in Rafah had new kinds of booby traps that weren't in the rest of the Gaza Strip. They added that in every tunnel, every street, every house in Rafah that they were in, they were video surveillance to facilitate ambushes against IDF forces. So now the IDF is prepared for the next steps of the combat in the Gaza Strip.
For more on these latest developments, I'm joined in studio now by former Israeli consul in Los Angeles, Yaki Dayan.
Good evening, Nicole.
Good evening. Our military and strategic affairs analyst at Miriam Institute, Jewish News Syndicate, and the Alma Center, Yaakov Lapin, as well as our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. This move coming out from Netanyahu, not necessarily a surprising move, but when we're talking about the war, one of the main criticisms is that there's no clear solution for the war. And now there's not even a war cabinet to discuss the war. So really, on a political level, I guess, Yaakov, what does this truly mean?
On a political level, I'm not sure, but I think, it touches on something which is even deeper, and that is that there has been a lack of civilian oversight for military activities here in Israel for far too long. And I think that this relationship between the civilian government and the military needs more standard regulation. Right now we have the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. That's pretty much the only mechanism that the government can supervise military activities. And I think there just needs to be clear guidelines for how that should happen. There needs to be an expanded a place for civilian agencies. We have the National Security Council, but its role is not completely clear either. So I think this touches on a much deeper issue, which is the need to formulate clear guidelines on the relationship between the government and the military, and probably it would have to wait until the next elections, but I think it's time for Israel to actually get that more organized.
Yeah, I see you smiling over here.
No, I think that Yaakov is giving him more of a strategic explanation to this political move. I mean, it's basically a political move. Once Gantz and Eisenkot are out, there is no war cabinet, and if Netanyahu could have dissolved the other cabinet, he would have done that because of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. He doesn't want to be pressured, and this is exactly how he's being pressured. And on the other side, he has the Americans that are pressuring him. They don't like the political pressure that is coming from the right, and this is the war cabinet, or this is the cabinet that exists now. So he would face pressures both from internally from his government and from the Americans on the other side. So I think that he wants to dissolve as many mechanisms as possible and control it as much as he can by himself, maybe with the Minister of Defense, Gallant.
Look, just for context, this is a three-person body, and when two members of it leave, there's no point in keeping this body. But this was established as an add-on to the security cabinet. So Israel does have a body that is authorized to run this war. It's not that Israel is going now into this unknown territory of who's going to call the shots. There's a formal mechanism of who's going to call the shots, but because of what Yaki just described, and Netanyahu is trying to take away some of the influence from the larger cabinet that has the ultra-nationalist elements, and is going to be forming a limited consultation forum, including himself, the Defense Minister Gallant, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, National Security Advisor Tzachi Hanegbi, and Shas leader Aryeh Deri. So there is a body that is running, is calling the shots, but not necessarily the body that most Israelis would like to see.
And certainly, speaking of what Israelis might want to see, we're seeing some of those demonstrations take to the streets today. Throughout the day, there have been these anti-government protests that protesters have really blocked a number of highways, roads. Some students have even walked out of high school today, all part of this week of disruption. These protesters are demanding elections and a hostage deal. And organizers of the demonstrations aim to see more than 1 million people head to the streets throughout the week. You're taking a look at some live images from one of those demonstrations right now. In fact, this is the main protest that started about an hour ago in Jerusalem. This is exactly where we find our I-24 News correspondent, Zach Anders, who is joining us from Jerusalem. Zach, this started outside the Israeli parliament, but protesters, they aim to march right to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house. So what are you hearing out there on the streets tonight?
Yeah, it's a chaotic scene just simply because of how many people are here tonight. Organizers estimate close to or more than 100,000 people are here, and the crowd is just massive, as we'll pan and show you that this runs all the way up the street away from the Knesset. This was, of course, pre-planned. They anticipated the crowds of this size. Now the question becomes, how representative are all the people here tonight, the people who are calling for an election in Israel? Are they so passionate about this issue that they're here tonight, or is this representative of a larger sample size? Are there more people that are around the country that feel this way? A lot of people here tonight feel like they do, feel like the political future of Prime Minister Netanyahu, if there was an election held today, would be over. We spoke to one of the hostage family members, the brother of Nimrod Cohen, who's 19 years old, one of the soldiers who was taken hostage on October 7th. He had some remarkable things to say, and it was remarkable just to see him here tonight, along with half a dozen other members of other hostage families. He says that more and more hostage families believe that they need to get new government in place to be able to secure the release of their loved ones, and that's why they're here tonight. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
The hostage situation has become political inside Israel, and I'll tell you more than that. The hostages who came back on the last Saturday, in a tactical operation, told us that they, in captivity, saw the protests and saw people on the street, and this is what gave them strength to remain alive and remain healthy. And part of our protest is also to make the government resign and to kick out the government, but also to give the hostages in captivity hope. And if my brother can see me here protesting, and if this is what gives him strength, and this is what will make him remain alive till I see him again, this is a strong incentive for me to be here today. I think most of the hostage family feel the same way as I do. I think that some of them are afraid to be here today because there was a lot of political pressure, a lot of pressure from the government and from certain political parties that are being put on the hostages family, like you said, to remain silent. But we are here to speak with our voices and to tell our truth.
Zach Anders giving us the latest update from Jerusalem. Thanks so much for bringing us that conversation from the ground as well. Now, currently, there's no plan for a post-war Gaza. There's no plan for the escalating tensions in the north. And there's no plan to help the former hostages who have returned to Israel to work through their trauma and reintegrate into society. That's the criticism from the medical team for the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, which spoke today at a committee in the Israeli parliament. The government, however, says that's simply not true. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has the story.
Moments of joy, emotional reunions, tears of relief. 92 Israelis who were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza have returned home safely. But after weeks or months in captivity, facing terrible conditions and a constant fear of dying, how do you return to a normal life? On Monday, the government was heavily criticized by the head of the medical team for the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, Dr. Haggai Levine, for not having plans for rehabilitation or treatment of those returned from captivity.
Yesterday, I visited Noa Argamani. I regret to tell you, despite all the joy, that she, along with the other released hostages, has no rehabilitation program. None. There is no body which has begun rehabilitating. No one has responsibility for rehabilitation. Even after their return, they're abandoned.
At a state audit committee in the Israeli parliament, the issue was, once again, brought to the table. The lives of the former hostages and their families and friends will never be the same again. The stories they tell are of constant emotional and physical abuse.
he's broken, and he needs time to heal and to fix his mind. He doesn't know what to decide. It's hard for him to make a decisions. And at the first night, he also whispered. He talked to me like this. He whispered, and I always tell him, Andre, talk like this. You can talk.
They say there's not enough support in place to help them move on. But according to the government, every single person returned has a plan.
The Health Ministry Director General told me, and I know it to be true, that every hostage who returns has a program. They sit with him on a personal program, which will be put together by the teams treating him. So it's not true. The state definitely cares.
Meanwhile, it's not only the hostages who are blaming the government for not doing enough to help them. In April, survivors of the October 7th Nova Festival massacre said the government failed them that day and every single day since then.
I was covered by bodies over every part of my body. I hid under one specific body every time the terrorists came. The body punctured and bled on me from everywhere. I lifted its head and put its cheek over mine, and this is how I protected my body. So if a bullet hit me, it wouldn't hit my head. The terrorists didn't stop coming. I called the police non-stop, and the answer I got was, a police car is on its way. I got this answer for the duration of 6 hours. I was hiding for a total of 8 hours. The last 2 hours, I gave up and didn't call anyone. And indeed, cars did come by. But unfortunately, they were terrorist cars who came to shoot at us again and again. Does anyone have any doubt that I'm going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life?
We need treatment now and not to go back to work a month after it happened. There is no me. I have anxiety, flashbacks. I'm waking up at night. I experience this event again and again.
The journey to begin healing from the traumatic attack almost 9 months ago is only just beginning for those directly affected as well as for the Israeli nation as a whole. And the road is long.
Quite a struggle for many of these released hostages to just try and get some sort of help from the government, it seems. Yaki, as we're sitting here in the studio listening to their plea, really, it's gut-wrenching that they might not be getting the services that they clearly desperately need.
Nicole, it's clearly a disgrace. I mean, hostages needing to beg for some kind of a rehabilitation, it's unbelievable. I mean, that should have been done, the program, the plan, should have been done ages ago, at the beginning of the war, not 8 months after the war. And if it's not there, so it's really a big problem of the government. It's another failure of this government, and it's really a pity to see that and seeing the hostage families simply begging for that.
Yaakov, what more if the government on the one hand is saying we are trying, we're giving these resources, but it's not really coming to fruition, then what more does the government need to be doing?
Well, I mean, there should be a fully prepared rehabilitation plan that involves a psychological support envelope, singling out those with PTSD. The Defense Ministry has, put together a plan like this for returning veterans of the Gaza war, and I would expect the Health Ministry to have an equivalent program for civilians who had to endure these unimaginable horrors. These people need to be accompanied from A to Z for years. Not all of them. Some of them will want to, do it on their own, and that's fine. But the ones that are crying out for help absolutely need help. Mental health. These are scars that are invisible, but they're very dangerous if they're left untreated, and these people absolutely need state help.
Not a quick process. I said, Ariel, you've reported on this in the past when we first saw some of these hostages being released 200 days ago now, which is crazy to say. But what can you tell us about your reports?
Nicole, this is what makes this even more frustrating, because already in October, as we were preparing for the deal in November, the Health Ministry issued guidelines for this exact plan that Yaakov and Yaki said that needs to be in place. This plan was announced by the Ministry of Health alongside the Defense Ministry, and in February they even updated the guidelines, updated the program. This is all process, all stages from initial absorption to make sure that what their key needs are at the beginning, following their nutrition plan, reintegration in normal life, and then also the psychological evaluation and support moving forward. This was all planned. This was all approved. I don't know why this was not implemented, but this raises very serious questions as to not only how Israel prepares to deal with released hostages who require a lot of guidance and support, but also once it makes a decision to implement such a plan, why didn't it happen in the end? Very significant questions are raised on a day like today regarding how the government, how the state is treating the hostages once they're back.
Certainly, and that's why we're hearing from those victims themselves about the help that they desperately need. Gentlemen, I want to turn our attention to the north now. It's a situation where we're talking about war, yet there's a place that the war has yet to fully start. And the United States is trying to make sure that it doesn't. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein is in Israel once again in a push to ease the ever-growing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. Hochstein has meetings with President Isaac Herzog, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and opposition figures, including Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz. Just last night, IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari issued a statement about Hezbollah's attacks. He said over the past 8 months, Hezbollah has fired more than 5,000 rockets towards the north. Hagari said the terror group's increasing aggression is bringing Israel to the brink of a wider escalation. Here's more in this next report by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran.
Amid soaring tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border, the IDF said it eliminated on Monday a key operative in the rocket and missile department of Hezbollah's Nasser unit. The operative, Mohammed Mustafa Ayub, was killed in a drone strike while he was driving in the southern Lebanese village of Salah.
Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation, one that could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region. Hezbollah is jeopardizing the future of Lebanon so that it can be a shield for Hamas.
As for Hezbollah, it hasn't attacked Israel since late Saturday, following months of daily cross-border strikes. That could be due to the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, which began yesterday, or perhaps the arrival of the U.S. presidential envoy Amos Hochstein to Israel and to Lebanon on Tuesday in an attempt to avoid further escalation.
We want this to be resolved either diplomatically or militarily. The current state of affairs is not a sustainable reality. 5,000 rockets raining down on our north, making the north uninhabitable. This is not a sustainable reality.
There are a few proposals for a diplomatic solution on the table, but they all require Hezbollah to withdraw its forces to about 6 miles from the Israeli border, together with a ceasefire that will go into effect immediately.
This is our land. This is the border of our country, and we're talking about occupied Palestinian land. It does not belong to the Zionists. The resistance is present in its lands, and the enemy is afraid that we will enter its territory, and they are not in a position to set conditions that we leave our land and country.
But there are two main obstacles for this diplomatic solution. The first, Hezbollah is a terror organization whose reason for existence is attacking Israel. And the second, the linkage Hezbollah has created between the war in Gaza and the conflict in Lebanon. But even if Hezbollah adheres to a Gaza ceasefire, the threat of thousands of Hezbollah fighters just waiting to strike Israel at a moment's notice will remain.
Let's get an update straight from the field now. Our correspondent Robert Swift joins us live from northern Israel. Robert, it seems just over the weekend we saw some of the most activity we've seen on the northern front, yet now over the past day and a half, we've seen a relative lull in Hezbollah firing towards northern Israel. So what can you tell us about the latest on the northern front?
Yeah, at the moment it does seem that the quiet continues. It may be the reasons that we've just heard in Ariel's report. Perhaps Hezbollah are taking the opportunity of the holiday or perhaps of Hochstein's visit to regroup, rearm. They've used a lot of ammunition over the last week. So this may be a tactical pause of sorts for them. But one other potential reason is due to the number of residents of southern Lebanese communities who over the last few days have been taking quick trips back to their homes to visit their communities during the holiday. It's understood from Arabic media reports that there's a number of communities where people have been returning. Just a reminder, there's about 100,000 Lebanese residents of the southern areas are similarly displaced, just like the 60,000 or so Israeli residents who've been displaced from northern parts of Israel. And a little bit earlier today, we spoke with the mayor of Kiryat Shmona, and he said that as far as he was concerned, the quiet that was taking place was not due to Israeli action, but was most likely due to the holiday. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
I think the first thing that needs to be done is to remove all the threats. No country in the world and no city in the world would simply accept that missiles were fired at its citizens. On the 8th of October, they launched an attack on us from the state of Lebanon for no reason, just to join in and prevent us from defending ourselves. Since then, they have been attacking us every day. Thousands of missiles, UAVs, attempted infiltrations by terrorist squads, and any threat that is happening only because we are Jews and because Hezbollah's treaty says that the state of Israel must be eliminated. And there are still those who think that agreements should be made with the other side. It is even written in the treaty in black and white, Hezbollah's entire goal is that the state of Israel will not be here.
Tens of thousands of residents on the northern border with truly no timeline on when things might return to a safe zone up there. Robert Swift, thanks so much for the latest on the ground. Coming back in studio now, Yaki, I want to begin with you when we're looking at Hochstein's visit to the region. He's been here multiple times, so truly, is there anything different that could happen, a political solution to the ever-growing military tension we're seeing?
The short answer is no. But basically, what the Americans are trying to do by Hochstein is to prevent a war, an overall war, especially before November 5th, the election day in the United States. They want to avoid any escalation, any war. For them, it's devastating. And Biden is afraid that he might lose the elections. And this is why Hochstein is coming again and again and again. The only thing is that the Americans have, and also Hezbollah, connected it directly to the situation in the south. So as long as there is no de-escalation in the south, there wouldn't be this de-escalation up in the north. The two are heavily connected, and we will not see any quiet before that. And what we have to understand that even a diplomatic solution, what Hochstein is trying to reach, would be in 1701 or something like that. It didn't work before, and there are no signs that it might work now. But clearly, no one wants a war. But what we see is a dynamic war, which might happen.
Certainly seems to be the case, gentlemen. We're going out for a quick break now, but we will continue this discussion when we come back after our break. Thank you so much, and for our viewers watching, don't go anywhere. We will be back after a quick break.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Se está realizando.
Welcome back to I-24 News. Israel recently announced a tactical pause in the daily fighting to better allow aid groups to distribute humanitarian aid shipments in the Gaza Strip. But so far, Israel says the United Nations has yet to take advantage of this new measure. And even as Israel is ramping up aid efforts, terror groups are trying to hurt them. Sirens sounded today in Kerem Shalom, indicating incoming rocket attacks near the humanitarian corridor. Our I-24 News French defense correspondent, Matthias Inbar, was there today at the border crossing where thousands of packets of humanitarian aid deliveries have entered the Gaza Strip throughout the course of this war. Matthias spoke to the IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, to hear about the recent efforts Israel is making to secure aid for Palestinian civilians.
Onions, rice, bananas, and also coffee. We are in the Israeli side of Kerem Shalom checkpoint in the south of Israel. Just behind me, a few dozens of meters, the Palestinian side of the checkpoint. There, 1,400 trucks are waiting to take these humanitarian aid. The problem, according to the COGAT, the Civilian Military Administration of the Israeli Army, the problem is how to take it, the logistical way for the International Association to take this humanitarian to the civilians of Gaza. That's the main problems. And according to IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari, the corridor has been built to help these humanitarian aid to be given to the civilians of Gaza. That's exactly what he is saying. Daniel Hagari is confirming IDF is in war against Hamas and terror organization and not against its population. How do you show the world that these organizations are launching rockets and mortars from these areas?
We're providing all the intelligence and all the data that we have, including footage, including videos, including intelligence hardcore, and we will provide them everywhere we need with the international community and the international courts to show them the face of Hamas, what Hamas is doing, using those places. He was firing on Kerem Shalom, the place that is providing and facilitating food for the people of Gaza. He was fighting, he was firing next to the Rafah crossing because he knew that those places are a human shield, an international shield for his terror machine, and his whole philosophy and strategy from the beginning of the war, we're revealing it, using hospitals, using UNRWA facilities to wage terror next to them, from them, underneath them. This is what Hamas has built. He's doing it in order, and he's exploiting the international organizations, and we will fight Hamas, and we will make sure that we dismantle Hamas, although the complexity, and in the same time,
find the solutions with the international community, with the international organizations, to make sure that the people of Gaza get their aid.
All this material has been taken into Gaza.
So what you can see behind me is humanitarian aid that's already gone through security inspection here at Kerem Shalom and is waiting to be taken onto the Gazan side of the border, where it needs to be picked up and distributed by the international organizations. Unfortunately, that distribution, the picking up and taking the aid to where it needs to get to, is where we see the biggest obstacle right now for aid getting to where it is needed, because the international organizations haven't got the sufficient logistical capabilities to distribute it, and we are inspecting in much larger capacity than they are able to distribute.
The United Nations has repeatedly warned against the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip for months now, saying famine is imminent. Numbers and estimates from the IPC's Famine Review Committee, a statistic often used by the UN, estimated there should have been roughly 22,000 deaths from famine or nutrition issues at this point. But that is clearly far from the case. So a new report from the IPC is walking those estimates back, stating after examining food availability, nutritional status, and mortality rates, the committee can't actually confirm famine conditions in the Gaza Strip. Well, for more on this report coming out now, I'm joined by our senior United States correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, let's begin by breaking down the highlights that we can gain from this report. And what does it really say about the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip?
The IPC has been sounding the alarm for months now on famine conditions in the Gaza Strip, specifically Phase 5 famine conditions, which is the most catastrophic, which should, according to its own estimates, lead to 2 deaths per every 10,000 people in those areas under famine per day. Now, of course, we've seen nothing like that. Even Hamas isn't claiming that. Hamas only says there was 30 deaths due to starvation in March and possibly 1 in April. None since then. So the IPC's Famine Review Committee, which reviews the IPC's work, went back and released a report just a few days ago showing that some of the assumptions that the IPC was using in its data were quite flawed. They were excluding food delivery sources such as the World Food Program, such as private food delivery. And the differences in the amount of food delivery from what the IPC says were happening for months to what actually was going on is essentially the difference between life and death. The caloric intake for Gazans went from about 35% of what was needed on a daily basis to over 100%. I mean, it's a monumental difference that can only be explained, well, we can explain it a few different ways, but we're waiting for the IPC to get back to us on exactly why their estimates were so far off in this particular matter. We've also laid questions down to the U.S.-funded FuseNet early warning famine system for assumptions on their data that were apparently well off the mark as well. The bottom line is that according to this review committee of the IPC, Gazans are getting what they need in terms of caloric intake each day through various methods of food delivery, and there apparently have to be a number of revisions to be done here in terms of who's starving in Gaza and who isn't. Obviously, these numbers have left Israel exposed for many months with accusations that they're intentionally starving the Gazan population. It's been used in international courts and tribunals, boycott attempts, arms transfer attempts to boycott Israel as well. Obviously, that's not what's been going on in Gaza, according to these new numbers coming out of the IFP's Famine Review Committee. Big, stark difference here.
Mike, let's talk about the real humanitarian crisis, how Hamas is using their own civilians as human shields, hiding in these densely populated civilian zones. They're regularly putting women and children in harm's way. There's a new report from the UN Special Representative on Children and Armed Conflict. However, this report, it only mentions the use of human shields once.
That's correct. And this report was made public back on Thursday, the annual Children and Armed Conflict report, also known as the List of Shame. It's intended to shame countries and armed groups who bring harm to children in times of war. Israel was placed on that blacklist for the very first time by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now, Virginia Gamba, the special representative for Guterres for Children and Armed Conflict, gave a press briefing on Thursday. And I asked her, said, listen, there's only one mention at all, one sentence of Hamas's use of human shields in Gaza. I said this whole matter it can't be understood without talking about Hamas's use of human shields, the death tolls, the injury tolls, the whole military philosophy of Hamas of using human shields. Why is there only one sentence devoted to this in this entire report that essentially castigates Israel? Here's the response from Virginia Gamba.
Let me start with I-24 News about the issue of human shields. I think that the reference of human shields on 104, first of all, if we put everything in the annual report on every situation, it would have at least 1,000 pages. So we have to choose very carefully what makes it to the report or not. If the figures must go there, as much context as possible, but we have always been deterred from putting into context each one of these paragraphs because of word count. I have to say it. Perhaps by saying it here, I will be heard. Many times every year, I've asked for waivers on word count for this annual report because the sensitivity, 26 situations, cannot be handled one-page situation. It really is inappropriate, I believe. I will continue with this fight, but we're all under constraints. It is mostly a financial issue and an issue of a standard across the UN system.
That's right. The UN is saying that essentially Israeli officials could be brought to the dock in The Hague because reports are only allowed a certain word count, and the UN is short on dollars. Absolutely astounding. I asked Gamba further when these verifications of Hamas's use of human shields may actually go on a report, because part of her dialogue with me was that things can only go in her report once they're verified, and because of everything that happened post-October 7th, there were not enough time and resources to verify all the accusations of Hamas's use of human shields, even though it's been known for decades, and the European Union and the Secretary General admitted to such post-October 7th. Here's her response to that question.
I think when we talk about it's a recognition by the United Nations that children have been used as human shields, and that this recognition will lead for verification purposes and monitoring purposes to late verifications. I think we possibly might be able to see more information on this specific and attribution on who specifically was using children as human shields in the next annual report. I know it's not the answer you want, but this is what I can tell you.
So a year from now, we may finally get some data and some hard numbers on Hamas's use of human shields. Way too late in the International Court of Opinion, at least for Israel at that point. I also asked Gamba about anomalies in the report that accuse Israel of certain violations that only apply to Israel. For instance, there were 2,000 some verifications of Israel maiming Palestinian children. It's a pretty high number, but we came to find 63% of those involved tear gas inhalation. Now, first off, she admitted that Israel is the only country that has tear gas violations struck against them, even though it's a widespread tactic throughout the world in riot dispersal. I also asked her, well, by your own definition, these maiming violations have to bring serious and permanent injuries to children. There are no reports of those from tear gas inhalation against Palestinians. Her reply was that there is much freedom for her staffers to interpret the data on the ground as they see fit. It's something she's trying to change, she says, through more stringent guidelines. But in the meantime, the definitions that the UN has laid down for such violations apparently don't mean much anyway. Also, there were some 2,000 or so violations of denial of care by Israel as well for young Palestinians trying to get medical care in Israel. That's only a 15% denial rate, which is lower than a lot of U.S. government-funded health care plans, by the way. Even those 15% of denial of care situations could not be explained in any detail by Gamba's report. She said she's also working to try to clear up exactly why even that minuscule amount of denial of care cases were carried through, whether it was a lack of an appointment with a doctor, technical paperwork problems as well. Again, just charges being levied here against Israel in this very public, widespread report, and not a lot of answers behind exactly why those data points are in this report.
Mike Wagenheim, thank you for asking those hard-hitting questions when it comes to these reports. Thanks so much. Now, even as Israel is fighting for its existence, it continues to sell weapons around the world in unprecedented amounts. The Ministry of Defense said 2023 set an all-time record for Israeli defense exports, bringing in more than $13 billion. Our Emma Siegel breaks down the unparalleled numbers.
For the third year in a row, Israeli arms sales have broken their own record. The Defense Ministry's International Defense Cooperation Directorate reported that exports totaled $13 billion last year, up from $12.5 billion in 2022. The value of exports has nearly doubled in the past 5 years. Air defense systems made up the largest chunk of exports at 36%, a massive jump from 19% in 2022. This is largely because of Israel's $4.2 billion sale of the Arrow 3 anti-ballistic missile system to Germany. The rising figure is also attributed to the Ukraine effect, where countries are arming themselves with advanced defense systems following the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022. In second place behind air defense, radars and electronic warfare systems accounted for 11%. And while Israel is known for its cyber intelligence systems, this only amounted to 4% of total sales in 2023. Amid the backdrop of widespread attempts to delegitimize and boycott Israeli companies globally, the Ministry of Defense says defense exports has become a central priority as part of an effort to strengthen security strategic relations worldwide.
Even in a year which the State of Israel is fighting against 7 different arenas, the defense exports of the State of Israel succeed in continuing to break records. This fact is a certificate of honor, first and foremost, for our defense industries and the creative and talented minds that work in them and drive them to the heights of breakthrough innovation.
While the Israel-Gaza war rages on and international outrage continues to mount, it is unclear if Israel will break its record for a 4th consecutive time in 2024.
I'm still joined in studio now by Yaki Dayan and Yaakov Lapin. Yaakov, I want to begin with you, and we're talking about all of these reports coming out. One, this remarkable one that first Israel is giving some of the largest number of Israeli defense exports this year, but also what we're seeing in the UN right now. Hearing from our correspondent Mike Wagenheim, I saw you shaking your head quite a bit in here.
I mean, yeah, Mike's report was superb. The excuses that we heard from the UN, I don't think a third grader would dare to make excuses like that about why he forgot his homework word count. But look, I want to talk about something even more important in my opinion, and that is our own lack of strategy when it comes to humanitarian aid. It's not good enough to tell the world correctly that trucks are lining up on the Gazan side because international aid organizations don't have the capacity to distribute them. We know that. It's not only that, by the way. Hamas continues to steal a good chunk of this aid, including fuel, which means that fuel and food and water that we are sending into the Gaza Strip is ending up in Hamas hands. That's helping the war effort, and that gives them hope that they will survive as a regime. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that Hamas, just like Hezbollah, it creates a civil government regime in order to support its terror army. And so, when we're talking about a post-Hamas future, so long as Hamas is allowed to distribute that aid, take it over, hijack it, and we are doing nothing, we as in Israel, then before the international community, we have to ask ourselves some very hard questions. Why have we taken no steps to try and distribute that aid ourselves, which would actually, I think, strike a serious blow to Hamas's hopes of becoming a regime? And why do we just keep hoping that the international aid agencies, which have proven themselves inept and incapable of dealing with this challenge, just passing the buck onto them? I think it's in Israel's own interest to take away from Hamas the ability to hijack aid, because so long as they can do that, their regime, which supports their terror army, will continue to survive.
We'll keep seeing this problem time and time again. Yaakov
Exactly.
Lapin, Yaki Dayan, thank you for your analysis on all of these developments throughout the war right now. Now, for more than 8 months, 120 hostages, they've been held captive in the Gaza Strip. As each day passes, the world seems to forget why Israel is fighting this war, to get each and every one of them back home. As their names and stories are spoken less and less in the international headlines, the Hostages and Missing Families Forum helped organize a conference to look at ways to put the spotlight back on their plate. Our Natasha Kirchuk reports from Sderot.
We're here in Sderot, a town bordering the Gaza Strip that was one of the worst hit on October 7th when Hamas terrorists and other terror factions from the Gaza Strip infiltrated and began massacring Israeli civilians. Now, Today, we're at a very unique conference, the first of its kind, a conference that is being held for the families of hostages and even some of the freed hostages to talk about what needs to be done to make sure that the plight of their family members who are still being held captive in the Gaza Strip remain in international news. 255 days into this war, there are 120 Israeli hostages who are still being held captive, and their families feel that the world no longer cares, that nobody is listening. So what they've done at this conference today is gather together international journalists from outlets like the Daily Mail, from ABC News, and as well as social media influencers to give their advice as to what these families can do to make sure that their stories are heard. It is not an easy situation. I've been speaking with a lot of these families. They sadly feel that the world no longer cares about their loved ones, that even though this is not political in their eyes, this is really about their civilian loved ones who were brutally taken hostage being released from captivity, the world does not seem to care. And so I spoke with some of them to hear what they took away from today's conference.
I'm the daughter of Raz Ben-Ami that returned from captivity after 54 days, and Noad Ben-Ami, it's my father that is still there. Today it's important for us because we need the world to wake up. We all the time speak about our loved one, and we want everyone to understand that those hostages, they're not only a poster, it's not just a picture, it's a family with a lot of people that love this person, and we all need them home as soon as possible because they don't have time, and we are just exhausted from trying to convince people that they are not have time because it's a civilian that took out of his bed. My father was kidnapped with his boxer, with his pajama from his bed. So I think that the people need to understand that it's urgent.
As you just heard from the daughter of released hostage Raz Ben-Ami, her story is that of many of the hostage families. One of their loved ones has been released, while another is still captive. It's a situation that prevents these families from fully healing, if that's ever a true possibility. This is the same story for Hadash Kadawon, whose family was torn apart on October 7th when Hamas kidnapped her 16-year-old daughter, Shachar, 12-year-old son, Erez, and their father, Ofer, all from kibbutz Nir Oz. Her children were released during the temporary ceasefire deal in November, but Ofer is still in Gaza. I'm joined in studio now by Hadass. Hadass, thank you so much for being with us right now. I want to first ask about your children. They were released more than 200 days ago, which is crazy to think. How have they been doing for the past days, reintegrating, coming back here in Israel?
It will take time. It will take time. It's not easy to get to normal life because we are still in the horror. We are still in the tragedy. Their father is still there, so they can't really cure. They can't really go back to normal. They're very worried and excited about their father, and you know, they know exactly what is going through, because even better than you and me, because they've been there. So they know about the starving, they know about the helpless, they know about everything. So, you know, it's not easy. It will take time.
Meanwhile, you have written a book since they have been released. In France, it's originally published in French. It translates to 52 Days Without Them. Tell me a little bit about your book. It'll soon be released in English as well.
Yes, I hope so. I think it's this book, it's like a sort of SOS book, you know. It's a scream book. It's come to scream to the whole world. Wake up! You must know and listen to, and to hear what's happened to us, to me, to my family, to my community, and to my Israel, to my country. Yeah, and it's fact. It's happened. You know, a lot of people talk. It didn't happen, and the anti-Semitism is going up. And this is like a testimony book. okay, testimony. It's come to tell my story, my family story, my kibbutz story, and my country story. And also there is a point of view of my children who came back, about what's happened to them, what they saw, what's happened, what they got through. And I think it's a very important book. I think the whole world have to read it and to understand that it's what's happened. It's like a Holocaust, like a Shoah, okay, like a pogrom, and we must and need the support of the whole world. And you know, now there is a Biden deal and Biden and Netanyahu deal. They have to do it. They must bring them back home.
They have to do it as in the Israeli government?
Sorry?
Who has to do it? You're talking about the international...
I'm saying that the whole world must make a pressure to put this deal, to make this deal. Because we must stop this war. We must bring them back home to their family, to their children, to their parents. There's still children there, and women, and old people. And it's really a very tough situation, and very cruel, and unhuman.
And we're seeing some protesters in the streets today. It's these demonstrations that one of the rescued hostages, Andrei Kozlov, said he saw these demonstrations and it gave him hope. Do you have a message to the hostages before we end our show, if they are seeing this, to give them some hope?
Yes, my children told me they saw I-24, and it's make me, they saw me, you know, they saw me fighting for them. It gave them power. They were crying and they said, wow, our mom, she's alive and she's fighting for us. And, you know, now it's like, they don't have time. Their time is finished. It's 9 months already. We don't know who is still alive, who is dead. We just got a message about 4 people from my kibbutz that they've been kidnapped alive and then been murdered.
We get this message every day, but
so
Hamas.
my message is to offer and all the hostage, be strong. Be strong.
And you will
hold on.
We'll
do all we can to survive.
Hadas, thank you so much. We're going out for a break
to help
now.
you